Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Wheeler, and hey, we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5e, and we're specifically going to talk about surprise. Now, I know people, either that or surprise attacks, but I want to talk about surprise in a very general manner, and I have already done a video on surprise attacks and surprise, and it's basically the information that has been collated from the player's handbook and from other sources, sage advice, stuff like that. And I recommend watching that video at some point. I believe somebody else has a video out. I think it's the Digital Dungeon Master did a surprise video as well, and I recommend watching those as well. But let us start off, because gosh, surprise can happen for a lot of different reasons. And the player's handbook gives you essentially one way it could be dealt with. And that's the most common situation you will come across. It's not really going to be an issue for you most of the time. You're probably just going to do a contest between stealth checks and a passive perception or an active perception check, and that is it. And it'll be sweet. It'll be fine. But there are situations where things can unravel, and I've been playing the game long enough that I've had them unravel on me many times. So please start off by turning to the player's handbook. On page 189 of the player's handbook, there is details on surprise. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out the section, and then I'm going to break it all down bit by bit for you so it makes as much sense as possible, and also gives you an opportunity to respond to me, because you don't have to do it the way I do. Okay, here we go. A band of adventurers sneaks up on a bandit camp, springing from the trees to attack them. And this is the concept of surprise when we're using stealth. Okay, is you sneaking up and you're trying to surprise somebody because they don't know you're there. A gelatinous cube glides down a dungeon passage, unnoticed by the adventurers, until the cube engulfs one of them. Another form of surprise. But the thing with the gelatinous cube is, does it say anything about making a stealth check with a gelatinous cube? Does it say anything about rolling with advantage? Monsters are one of those things that they often will have features that make them unperceivable in some way. And so therefore a passive perception check or an active perception check, will that really matter? Is that going to help in the slightest? And false appearance, so the roper is another good example, not just the gelatinous cube. Okay, moving down. In these situations, one side of the battle gains surprise over the other. Right, now if you've got more than two parties involved, it gets highly complicated. And I suggest you just ditch the idea of surprise completely. But let's keep going. The DM determines who might be surprised. This is what you need to focus on. The DM determines who is surprised. If neither side tries to be stealthy, they automatically notice each other. So in other words, if you're not trying to be stealthy, either side, you're going to be noticed. If one party is trying to be stealthy and the other is not trying to be stealthy, then the party that's being stealthy, well, hey, they might actually sneak up and be able to get a surprise attack. That's fine. The group that's not stealthing, there's no hope of getting a surprise whatsoever. This is given this situation. Otherwise, the DM compares the dexterity or stealth check of anyone hiding with their passive wisdom or perception check of each creature on the opposing side. So this is a contest. What you need to do is make sure that you're getting, to be successful with your stealth, you must get higher than the passive score or the active perception check. You can use an active perception check if the situation was to develop in such a way that it seemed appropriate to use that. That's fine. But if you are trying to perceive somebody who's being stealthy, you only need to get either equal to or greater than their stealth check. That's the difference. That's how a contest works. Any monster or creature that doesn't notice a threat is surprised at the start of the encounter. And that is the thing you need to remember. At the start of the encounter. Doesn't say anything about in the middle or at the end. If you're surprised, you can't move or take an action on your first turn of combat. So on the first turn of combat, you can't take an action and you can't move. And you can't take a reaction until the turn ends. Not the round, but your turn. If you are surprised, it's at the end of your turn where you cannot do anything else that you are no longer surprised, which means nothing. It's not like once you get unsurprised at the end of your turn, okay, now I can do something. No, you've lost that opportunity. You spend that turn being surprised, doing nothing. A member of a group can be surprised even if other members aren't. So that makes it even more complicated. That means that maybe somebody in your party could potentially be surprised by monsters or NPCs that are sneaking up on them or being stealthy, but other members in the party might perceive them. So that's interesting. That makes it a lot more complicated, but that's certainly part of it. Okay, so now that we've done that, we've wrapped our head hopefully around the basics. That I've read it all out. Let us go to the workout screen. This is where we start using some dice and trying to figure things out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through this little situation here. This is just to give you an idea of how it works. As I said before, please put in comments, ask questions as we go. I want you to treat this more like a workshop. What's that? Q181? Classic mimics always surprise me with a few missing fingers. Well, yes, they certainly can. And see, the mimic is a good example. How would you know? How can you make a perception check to perceive that there's a mimic rather than a treasure chest? Or that's a mimic rather than a door? How would you know? They simply appear as they appear. They will probably surprise you. So a passive perception check, will that mean anything? Now, you might not be able to see that they are a monster or some other creature, but maybe you hear them. It's really going to be up to you to determine that, because it doesn't spell it out absolutely in the monster manual or in the Dungeon Master Guide or the Player's Handbook. I love when you catch those live. HowtoDandD is on the best. All right, well, thank you very much. Okay, so let's get down to the nitty-gritty. There are a few things that need to be answered here. The first thing I want to point out, the Dungeon Master determines surprise, and there's more than one way to determine who is surprised, and it doesn't just have to be around stealth checks and passive perception checks or a perception check. And Mike Mills actually points this out in Sage Advice when he starts talking about, yes, there are other ways of getting surprised, and it doesn't have to relate around using stealth and passive perception. Okay, if neither side tries to be stealthy, there is no surprise because they automatically notice each other. So that's nice and simple. You're going to just roll through your first round with nothing to do with surprise. Everybody gets to act. You just roll your initiative for both sides and it's done. Okay, as I said, compare the stealth check with the passive perception or a perception check before you start your combat. You're still going to be rolling initiative, and that will still determine who takes their turn first. It'll just mean once you've made those stealth checks and you've used your passive perception, it'll determine whether you can do anything on the first round. So with this little example here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to present you with a couple of dice rolls. I'm going to use all of the pre-generated characters you can find in the Dungeons & Dragons 5e starter set. So I'm using the fighter, the cleric, the wizard, and the rogue. And I believe I'm using... Which fighter am I using? I'm using the one with the great axe, if you're confused. So here we have a little situation. We're on the King's Road. For those of you who want to know which map it is that I'm using, it's the King's Road, okay? And here we have a group of goblins. This time they are journeying through the woods, and we've got a bunch of characters who are hiding in the trees. They're using that as cover. So what I'm going to do is going to roll dice for each one of them and get you some stealth checks. What we have here with the goblins, I'm going to use their passive perception. Now the passive perception for a goblin is a 9. I'm designating that with the blue dice. That's the 9, okay? So they have to get, on their stealth check, they have to get greater than 9. Okay, they can't get equal to, otherwise they're going to be detected. So let us start off with the cleric. Now the cleric has a stealth modifier of -1, which is awful, and has disadvantage. So we're going to roll 2 dice and take the lowest result for the cleric here. Alright, oh my gosh. Okay, so I got a 1, which is the lowest dice. Take the lowest dice. -1, that is 0. Okay, alright, now I have a little bit of a problem because now I've got to find a dice with a 0 on it. There we go, 0. So the stealth modifier, or stealth score for that particular character, our cleric, is 0. Well, that isn't going to help us. Let us move on to the rogue. Now the rogue has a stealth modifier of 7. So we're going to roll our 20-sided dice. This time I get to roll just 1 dice. You could, if you wanted to, decide that being in the cover would give them advantage. It's really up to you as a dungeon master. You do not have to. You can just make it a straight roll. If they're wearing heavy armor, they'll have disadvantage, or if they're wearing a particular type of armor, they'll have disadvantage. Okay, so I'm going to just make it a straight roll for this situation. Make it nice and simple. I rolled a 4 plus 7. 4 plus 7 is 11. So that is 11. Well, that's certainly higher than the passive perception of our goblins. So that's good news. All right, so let's get on to the wizard. Now the wizard doesn't have any disadvantage, not wearing armor. The stealth modifier is a +2, so I roll my 20-sided dice, and I got a 2, which means I get 9. 9 in total. 2 plus 7 is 9. There is the stealth. Now it's equal to, it's not greater than. So you've got 2 members who have essentially failed. They haven't been sneaky enough. All right, now we're going to go with the fighter. Unfortunately, this fighter has disadvantage. They're wearing armor, and it's a -1. It's not good. Roll those 20-sided dice. Take the lowest result, which is the 9. -1 is 8. All right, so there's our 8. There's our checks. So out of these, you'll notice that 3 have failed, only 1 has succeeded. So if you're taking this as a group check, this would be a fail. Okay? That's fine. If you want to decide, well, I'm going to allow this particular character to remain hidden, unseen, well, because they are, then that's fine. Give them advantage if you want. If they're unseen, give them surprise if you want, but the rest of the party don't get it. If it had been a bit different, if I rolled a little bit better, so for example, the wizard had rolled and wound up with a 19 as a score for their stealth, that's 2 successes, 2 fails. You only need half of the group to be successful. That's half the group, 50%, for the whole party to benefit from their good rolls. So even though the fighter and the cleric did a terrible job of hiding, the wizard and the rogue would help lift up their scores. That's how the concept of the group stealth check works. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Even if you roll these dice, you still roll initiative. That still determines who will be going first. All it means is, as you're going through your initiative order, you're going to be determining, okay, this person's surprised, you don't get to do anything. This person is surprised, they don't get to do anything. If they aren't surprised, they get to act. That's all it is. And if they're unseen, then they get advantage. Just because you have surprise does not mean you get advantage. You have to be unseen. Remember, unseen, you get advantage. Part of the unseen attacker rules. Okay, so that's the basics of that particular situation. I'm going to get to the chat box. I can see it's getting busy, and I'm glad to see that. We will respond to all of this stuff. A passive perception check could automatically fail. If the goblins are chatting amongst themselves and are not doing anything, ditch the passive perception check. Okay? If they're mucking around and doing nothing, don't even use an active perception check or a passive. just ditch it completely. Because remember, you don't use a passive check if you're distracted. If you're distracted doing something else, okay, maybe there's birds flying above and they're pooping on the goblins and they're more interested in that and they're distracted, then fine, okay? Doesn't matter what they score in terms of their stealth as long as they're hidden and can't be seen, okay? Now when I say hidden, even though you get a 0 on your stealth check, if the other party can't see you because you're in cover and you can't, heavy obscurity or total cover, it doesn't matter, okay? You could have a -1 and it wouldn't matter. Absolutely fine to do it that way. If you don't like it, then don't do it that way, okay? All right, but remember, you don't use your passive check, your passive perception check if you're distracted. It doesn't come into play. There isn't going to be a perception check, okay? All right, next. I've already talked about group checks, and they can be very complicated, as I've already pointed out. I've already talked about only half the group needing to be successful, and they would still get, the entire party would still get surprise. If you don't like the group check, then don't use it. All right, okay, now, if both groups are stealthing, it gets horribly confusing. It's one of the worst situations you can possibly have if both groups are stealthing. So maybe let's get rid of these guys. These guys here, they're hiding up. They're waiting for somebody to come down the road and they're going to jump them. What they don't know is also there's a tiger hunting, and it's making its way, being stealthy, moving through the region, along the road, looking for something to eat. Now you've got both parties making stealth checks and both parties making perception checks. And honestly, when it starts getting there, I would just dump it. I've had this happen to me a couple of times and it's awful, okay? I would just say, all right, screw it. I'm just going to say, all right, whoever gets the highest stealth check, they can have surprise, or just ditch surprise completely because they're all hiding, okay, and they're all trying to be stealthy and they're all moving with stealth or whatever it is. You can try to break it all down and do your stealth checks for both sides and then use passive perceptions for each one of them as well, but oh my gosh, it'll take you like 10-15 minutes just to roll through all of that. Okay, all right. Surprise only occurs in the first round of combat of your encounter, and I want to point that out. It can never happen again later on, no matter, even if you hide again. So rogues can use their bonus action. Any character can try to hide as an action. So rogues at level 2 get to hide again using their cunning action. Level 1 rogue would get to have to use their action, but other characters can use their action to hide. That doesn't mean you're getting another surprise, okay? It doesn't mean that the enemy is going to get no action. That has nothing to do with it. It only happens in the very first round, and after that, ditch the concept of surprise. You can't do anything in the first round of combat if you are surprised. Okay, that is no actions. That includes bonus actions, no movement, no reactions, as it already spells out in the book. That includes interactions. You can't use an interaction, and you can't speak. Okay? You can't do anything. You just spend that first round being surprised and doing nothing. Surprise ends at the end of your first turn. Okay? Important to understand. Once you've had your turn and you haven't been able to do anything, the surprise ends. That means that there's an opportunity for you to use a reaction after your turn ends on somebody else's turn. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. Okay? Surprise ends at the end of your first turn. Once your turn finishes, not the round, your turn finishes, you can still take a reaction, okay, provided your turn has ended. All right, moving on. Surprise can be determined by the Dungeon Master without stealth checks, and I've already said this. Somebody does something unexpected. How many times have you been sitting at the table and somebody decided to do something that was totally unexpected and like do I use surprise or do I roll initiative? Or hang on, if I roll initiative but they did the first thing that triggered everything else, then who gets to go first? Does the person who did the unexpected thing get to go first, or does somebody else get to act because they had a higher initiative? And you sit there and you think, oh my gosh, what the heck's going on? And this is what Mike Mills is talking about. You can have surprise occur before an encounter, has nothing to do with stealth or passive perception, just because somebody did something unexpected and nobody else was expecting that to happen. How you determine that is another headache, and I will get there. Don't trust me, I'm going to answer that question. Feral instinct is one of those exceptions. Okay, so for those of you who are thinking, yeah, but what about that barbarian and their feral instinct? How the heck does that work? How does that work? All it means is, on the first round, provided you choose to rage, it's an exception to the general rule of surprise, okay? Feral instinct is an exception. Provided that you decide to rage, you aren't surprised. If you decide, as the barbarian, when your turn comes up in the initiative, and we're looking at determining whether you're surprised or not, if you decide not to rage, which you can do, even though it's a bonus action to do that, okay? And you're not supposed to be able to have bonus actions during the surprise if you're surprised, right? Provided that you rage, you're not surprised and you can act normally. But if you don't rage, you choose not to rage, when you're given the opportunity to, then you're surprised, you don't do nothing. That's how feral instinct worked. Okay? Assassinate does not mean that you can't be surprised. For assassinate to work correctly, you need to have a high initiative, and you also need to basically surprise your enemy. So you will need to have surprise. It doesn't give it to you automatically. All right. What if there are multiple threats? What if there's more than one threat? What if we've got a tiger and the group and they're hiding, and then suddenly, oh my gosh, somebody else is hiding. Maybe there's a bear hiding behind this rock, and there's 3 parties involved. What the heck do I do now? Panic? No. Okay. Personally, like I said, with multiple groups using stealth and then making passive perception checks or active perception checks, I would just ditch it. Okay, it's probably easier just to roll all the stealth checks, and whoever got the highest one out of the particular group gets to have the first action. Yep, they don't get surprised and everybody else does. Probably easier to do that than to try and compare every single group's stealth and passive perception. It'll drive you nuts. What about a group? Just take the average. Okay? With their stealth checks, just take the average. Just use that. None of this is in the Player's Handbook, in the Dungeon Master's Guide, in the Monster Manual. I'm just giving you information so you can get yourself out of these problem situations. There is absolutely no penalty to your saving throws for being surprised. Even though you are surprised, you might still get to make a saving throw of some kind. It might not necessarily be a dexterity saving throw, but it might be a constitution saving throw, because really they don't disappear. You know, you just make them because it's how your body responds to stress. You might still make a wisdom saving throw. You might not, but it doesn't necessarily mean just because you're surprised there is a penalty like disadvantage or that you can't make that saving throw. Just bear in mind that it can get really complicated because you need to check spell descriptions and class ability features and feats and so forth, and work out whether there is an exception going on here. Surprise has absolutely no effect on the rogue's evasion. It is not a reaction. Evasion just works. It's just there. It just works. It's not a reaction. It's not an action. It's not a bonus action. It's not an interaction. It's nothing to do with that whatsoever. Surprise can occur only once. I've already said that in the first round. Okay, and that means that once we get past the surprise round, really we're dealing with the hide action and unseen attacker rules. You're going to drop out of this, forget about the surprise rules now. Once you start getting into round 2, round 3, so forth, start using the unseen attacker rules and the hide action rules. Those are more important now. They take place after the first round. A monster can't take or use their legendary actions while they are surprised. Okay? You've got to wait until the end of their first turn, when they're no longer surprised, before you can start using those legendary actions at the end of somebody else's turn. For those of you who are wondering, surprise does not grant advantage on the first roll or attack roll unless you are hidden or hiding or unseen for your attack rolls. I think I've already said that. It is possible to take a reaction before your first turn in combat if not surprised. So, for those of you who are not surprised in the encounter, you're not surprised, it's not your turn, something happens, can I use a reaction? Absolutely, you can. That's not going to be an issue. Uncanny dodge for the rogue does not work if you are surprised in the first round. Okay, remember, uncanny dodge is a reaction. Once you've come to the end of your first turn, and because you're surprised, you're no longer surprised at the end of your first turn, then uncanny dodge can be applied. But before that, no. What happens if a player states that they want to attack, cast a spell, or perform an action that triggers a combat with or without surprise? Well, that's really complicated, and we're going to get into that. I really want to, but I want to go back to all the questions that people are posting, because I can see there are a lot of questions. All right. Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate the kudos. All right. Let's see. And Aaron's got here, just surprised my group of inmates with an ancient red dragon, campaign over. Well, not necessarily. Just because it's an ancient red dragon does not mean that's the end. And yes, an ancient red dragon could potentially take out the entire party. Alright, Aaron, what do you got here? Yeah, it was the last chapter of the Rise of Tiamat. Okay, alright. What else you got here? There isn't a red dragon in it, but they got it very easy. Very easy. Had to have some opposition. Okay, alright. Now I'm having a little bit of trouble. I'm scrolling through here. There are a lot of comments coming through. A lot of questions. Alright, so what do we got here? Yeah, alright. Believe me, they had made it in that far. I went and said, alright, okay, you guys are chatting about Tiamat. Well, that's fine. That's fine. Alright, I'm going to come back to the chat box, and I'm going to deal with actually unpacking how you can use surprise when there's no stealth check. Okay, so let us ditch the concept of hiding. We're out in the open. People can see you. And a situation might arise where you get an opportunity to try to do something that's surprising. Maybe it's at a council, maybe you're communicating with somebody, maybe you're having a chat with some guards. I know in my own group that occasionally they'll say, look, I want to be deceptive. I want to pretend that I am their friend. And I will make them make a deception roll. And I'll say, okay, you have been successful because you rolled higher than their insight. I did a contest. I allowed them to make a 20-sided dice roll, use their deception skill, and they scored higher than the guards or the opposition's insight check. So, yes, you've been successful. They believe you are their friend. And then the next thing I'll get is, I cast Fireball. And you're like, oh my gosh, okay. Do I get surprise? This is the question that has happened a few times. So something surprising. If you honestly, as a dungeon master, and you think that your monsters or NPCs were completely taken by surprise, and it seems reasonable to actually use that mechanic, then do it. You've just used a contest to determine whether they'll know if it's going to take place, whether the enemy, the party are going to cast the fireball if that's what they plan to do, or the other way around. It doesn't matter. Okay, you've used a contest. Instead of using stealth and perception or passive perception, you used deception and insight. You could also use sleight of hand. Maybe you decide, look, I'm going to sneak something out of an NPC's or a monster's lair or out of somebody's pocket. Okay, what I want to do is I want to slide something out so they can't see it. And the most common thing I've come across when I've used sleight of hand, I said, okay, fine, you can use a sleight of hand to, you want to draw your weapon so they can't see it. Oh, okay, fine, you can do that. Make a sleight of hand check. They'll make the check, and if it winds up being higher than the perception check, I might use a perception check to oppose it, or even an insight. Either one would be reasonable in my view. Okay, all right, I pulled it. Okay, I stabbed them. And you think, well, okay, do I roll initiative, or hang on, is this a potential surprise for the first round? Well, you've just used a different mechanic, okay, different mechanics, but the same concept using a contest, but only it was sleight of hand and a perception check, or sleight of hand and an insight check. So that's how you deal with situations that can be surprising. Maybe somebody's using the persuasion check, trying to persuade somebody to turn around and go and close the door. Yep, they turn around, they close the door, you were successful with your perception check opposed to their insight. They are convinced. And then, oh, I'm going to attack them from behind as they're closing the door. Another opportunity where surprise could be involved. Look, you do not have to do it this way, but I know you'll be probably coming across a few situations where the players will say, do I get surprise? Do I get to act? Will they be surprised? Does it work that way? Okay, the easiest way to understand surprise is use a contest between skills. If they are successful, they can surprise the opposition. That's the easiest way to deal with surprise, in my opinion. Okay, so who goes first? As I said, all you do is make sure that you roll initiative. So what happens if I'm not dealing with a situation and do I roll initiative and there's no surprise, but who gets to act first if, say, the wizard says, I want to cast a spell, magic missile at the front leader? What do? Do I use surprise? No. In this situation, I decide, no, I'm not going to use surprise. But who gets to act first? Because the rogue, what if the rogue's initiative was lower than everybody else's? Sorry, the wizard's initiative was lower than everybody else's. Let the wizard perform their action that triggered the entire combat. And then, for the first round, okay, just push your wizard up to the top of the initiative order. Let everybody else take their initiative or turn in the initiative order as normal. And then when you get to round 2, the wizard drops back to their original initiative that they rolled. That is how I deal with situations when somebody does something that triggers an encounter and I go to roll initiative, but they don't actually roll that high. They actually roll quite low, because I need them to perform their action before everybody else can respond. Hopefully that makes sense. And I know this isn't so much about surprise, it's about how to deal with initiative and who takes the first turn in initiative when somebody is key to triggering the encounter. Alright, so I think I covered that pretty clearly. The next thing I want to talk about, the first attack or triggering action is what a creature can do in the first round. No, I've already covered that. How do you determine surprise if an event occurs where there's no dice roll, there's no stealth check, there's no deception check, there's nothing? Like a volcano explodes. Well, a volcano exploding could be quite surprising, okay? A building erupting into fire could be quite surprising. How do I deal with that? That's a real doozy, isn't it? Oh my gosh. what am I going to do? It's not like a volcano has a skill that I can use to roll opposed by the monsters or the player character's insight or perception check or anything like that. The easiest way to deal with events that occur that have no stat block is simply make up a DC, a difficulty class, for the monsters, the NPCs, or the player's characters to be successful. Set a DC that they need to perform with a perception check to avoid being surprised. Otherwise, they're surprised. So the volcano, I'm going to decide, it's quite a surprise the volcano goes up. I'm going to set the DC at 20. That means that everybody needs to make a perception check or use a passive perception. And if they don't have 20, they're going to be surprised. Volcano explodes. First round, they get to do nothing and lava starts coming towards them. Or first round, they don't get to do anything because the building erupts because it catches on fire, or there's a bomb in there, and they had no way of knowing there's a bomb in there. So, boom. Remember, some things can just automatically cause surprise no matter what. As I was saying, some monsters have features that don't talk about making stealth checks or having advantage or anything like that. And all they say is they appear as something normal, like your animated armor. How do I know how? Well, animated armor is a bad example because most players think that all suits of armor that are standing or sitting in a dungeon are going to come alive and attack them. But gelatinous cube, you can't see it, you really can't detect it. Something like false appearance from other types of creatures and monsters like the roper, you can't. You can see it, but you don't know what it is. So sometimes you might actually apply automatic surprise, and it won't matter whether they make a perception check. They could roll 35 and it won't matter. Okay, so that's how I unpack surprise. Surprise, I've seen people talk about surprise rounds. Now, we don't really talk about surprise rounds. We used to talk about surprise rounds in older versions of the game, and then somebody else decided to start coining the phrase, oh, surprise is a condition. No, surprise isn't actually a condition. If it was a condition, it would be in the back of the player's handbook in the conditions section. Okay, surprise is just a special round that sometimes occurs because the right situation, trigger, action, or lack of an action has occurred. That's all it is. Let's not get silly and start giving it a term. It doesn't have a term. You either have surprise or you don't. Sudden betrayal can trigger surprise, as we just talked about. So you're talking with your best mate, you've got an NPC that you're conversing with, and you think everything's fine, and you reach over to shake hands, and instead of shaking hands, they've just cast Shocking Grasp. Well, that would surprise me. So there are ways of using your surprise that don't involve anything to do with stealth checks or even a dice roll. If all the creatures on both sides of the conflict are surprised, no one gets to act in the first round. Okay, so that's it. I'm going to go through all these questions because there are a lot, and I'm just going to say my usual sign out stuff and start dealing with the questions. So if you found the video helpful or informative, I'm not going anywhere, don't worry, I'm not running away. Please share and like the video. If you're not already subscribed, then maybe this is a good time to subscribe. Subscribing means that you get informed when I go live and when I publish a new video. I really like it when people subscribe and hit the bell button, because you will get notified by hitting the bell button if I am live. If you just push the subscribe button, it doesn't mean you'll be notified when I go live. Okay? So bear in mind, that's really important. All it does by hitting the subscribe button is it puts into your list on the side for YouTube that there is a video you haven't watched. That's all it does. It just gives you a list on the side. When you're looking at the general YouTube page, it'll just see, okay, there's some videos that this channel has made that I haven't watched yet. That's all the subscribe button does. The bell button is a bit more important. Okay, next. I really like it when people support my channel by watching my videos, and you're doing that right now. And I appreciate it a lot. I really do. I have to thank everybody who has actually built this channel. It hasn't been me. It has been everybody who actually was interested in my stuff. I don't do Patreon, but I do affiliate links. So they're down in the description. You find something, it's a link that you can buy stuff online, Amazon, Book Depository. I get a small commission. You get paid exactly the same price, and you don't even have to buy the thing that it's linked to, which is awesome. So if you have questions, I'm going to get to them in the chat box right now. If you're not part of the live stream, put your questions, your feedback, whether you disagree with me, if you do things differently, put that down in the comments section after the live chat if you want to. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s, or maybe a 16.